I know.
Put it here. That's all.
It's closer to my mouth like this.
You take out the mask.
Oh, yeah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا من سيئات أعمالنا من يهده فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله ونشهد أن محمد رسول الله. All praise is due to Allah, Lord of the heavens and the worlds. So March is typically known. Last month, for example, in February, we had Black History Month where we were talking about Black history, and it's very important for us to learn about Black history because of the accomplishments as well as, how history has been changed. But March is known for something different. It's known for it to be Women's History Month, the history of women. And so today I wanted to make my khutbah about gender rights and gender history in Islam. I wanted to talk about this because I felt like right now is an appropriate time to discuss this topic, especially with the times and the trends and everything that's going on right now. I would like to speak about it. So in this khutbah, I will be talking first and foremost about gender rights in Islam. So things such as, the rights of who upon who and what upon and so on and so forth, specifically about women, since it is Women's History Month. And I also want to talk about women's history in Islam, because I feel like it is an important subject to talk about, especially in this time and this day, in this month in particular. So, first and foremost, I want to talk about women in Islam, specifically their rights and just their presence and their importance in Islam. So, we hear a lot, especially by Western media and by a lot of people, especially who criticize Islam, that women do not have rights in Islam. They're oppressed and they are put down upon and they are not treated properly in Islam. But as we know as Muslims, that's not true. Now, part of this might have to do with the way how a lot of cultures are in Islam, how a lot of cultural Muslims, as I would like to say, put down women and they don't treat women the same as men. That is a cultural issue, not an Islamic issue, which should change, definitely. But in Islam, we believe that women are the equal half of men, and they should be treated as such. Women have the same rights as men. And what even makes me a little more proud is the fact that while other cultures and historically were putting down women and we're treating them more inferior, we're treating them less equally, Islam was advocating for women's rights and fighting for them, and so on and so forth. I want to give certain examples of these rights as well as talk about the rights of women in Islam. For example, Islam established that women were allowed to own property and land and participate in legal and political affairs, among others. Now, I know that this is a very specific example of women's rights in Islam, but why am I bringing this one up in particular? And the reason why is because, well, let's talk about the first one, property and land. It was when I was in United States history, when I was in United States history, I learned a lot about the way how American society was back then. And one thing that they really brought up was the fact about how low women's rights had just a century ago. How they basically had no rights. Anytime they would work, they'd be paid less, and on top of that, all of their wages and earnings had to be given to their husbands. They were not allowed to own anything. And Islam specifically and strictly forbade this. And they established that women in fact do have rights and to property as well as ownership. And it's just something that I like to see, how issues that have been fought for just in modern American history have been as I should say, have been already established in Islam, that women have these rights. Another example I'll give is again with participating in legal affairs. As we all know, the right to vote was such a huge movement in the 19th or the 20th century and the early 20th century. But as we all know, Islam not only gave women the right to vote, but they were actual politicians back then, participating in legal affairs, handling major political, handling major political business. And I find that very, very interesting, as well as very, it's something that makes me proud to be a Muslim, knowing that my religion has fought for gender equality and fought for these, and strived for this, when the entire world wasn't. When the entire world looked at Islam as being crazy for supporting women's rights. And nowadays, women's rights, as it should be, is the status quo. The things that I just mentioned beforehand is now obviously implemented in society today. But Islam was just so much more further ahead. And it's a good thing that, it's a good thing that Islam has fought for these rights for women when no one was. So as I've mentioned before, the rights, women have equal rights to men in Islam. Like I mentioned before about how there's just so many examples that I could give about how women have have equal rights to men and have been have had their rights when society didn't give them their rights. I could list a bunch of examples, but there's one example in particular that I want to bring up. Because of a certain trend that's been going on in social media. If you've been paying attention, there's this trend, it was a study where 97% of women were, between the ages of 18 to 24, have reported being sexually harassed by men. And it's a very, very, very big problem. It's a huge problem, and, the fact that women have, that women are feeling unsafe going outside because they might be harmed by a man it's honestly such a horrible thing. And it reminds me of a story that happened in Islamic history back during the Prophet's time, when a woman went to the Prophet and complained about a man who had violated her, who had I don't know the details, and I don't really want to get into the details obviously, but had violated her in this way and that way, and she explained this to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then once the investigation and the whole trial went down, this man was punished by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam because of his actions. And it's just something to understand that Islamically we are taught to have shame and to treat women with respect and not as objects. And it's so unfortunate how today we're still trying to fight for women to feel safe and to feel as people and not like objects. It's a sad thing that this is still happening. But I feel like, like I said, if we follow our Islamic, if we follow Islam and we follow what we're supposed to do, we solve a lot of the issues in the world. We solve a lot of the problems of the world, like, with racism, as I've mentioned before, and right here with this whole situation with sexism and misogyny and, making women feel uncomfortable. This is another issue that, Islam helps solve. So I talked about the rights of certain women, and I talked about that. But what about Islamic history with women? I feel like this is a really important thing for me to talk about, especially in this month. So let's start off by one of the most important, most popular, probably the most popular woman in Islamic history. That is Aisha radiallahu anha bint Abi Bakr, one of the Prophet's wives, mother of the Ummah. And she played a very, very significant role in the Ummah. She's considered to be the most important female scholar in Islam. She compiled, I believe, the second most amount of hadiths by any Sahaba. She spent a lot of time with the Prophet. And obviously, since she was his wife, she was very important in her role with medicine, history, and rhetoric, collecting a lot of the Prophet's, the words and whatnot, as I mentioned before, the hadith. She was just a major role in Islam, and it's very interesting because as a Sahaba, she gets talked about a lot, but her weight necessarily isn't as put down as much. I mean, she was, she did a lot of work. Collecting the second most amount of hadiths is a lot of work, so she was a very reliable source, very important scholar, very helpful, and I feel like not only that, but the Prophet ﷺ would turn to her for advice, which I feel is a really important thing, important message in my head, because a lot of times, especially today, a lot of complaints that women have about men is that men don't necessarily carry the weight of the words of certain women. We don't really listen to the women in our life, whether whether it be our spouses or or whatnot, or daughters, so on and so forth. But the Prophet ﷺ would listen to his wives and his daughters, and I feel like we should be following that in the same way. We should be showing affection, and we should be showing our care and respect to important women in our life, and respect to them as well. Another important woman is Khadija radiallahu anha. She was a very wealthy businesswoman, and we all know the story about her, how she was not only the first female believer, she was the first believer in Islam. So the first Muslim was a woman, and it's just another thing that's very important in our religion, how she would care about the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet would care about her. It was a mutual, healthy relationship between the two. But not only that, as I mentioned before, she was a wealthy businesswoman, and she would help the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ financially, and the Muslims financially in need. And one of the biggest examples of this is during the major boycott. If we know that story, how the Quraysh would boycotted all of the Muslims and tried to basically kill them by cutting them off from all resources and letting them die. The Khadija radiallahu anha used all of her resources and everything she had to make sure that the Muslims be okay, and she helped save the Muslim ummah in a way back then. And she's a very important figure in Islamic history that we should be caring about. Another Sahabiya that I find very interesting, I've mentioned her in a previous khutbah before, but I'll talk about her again, is Nusayba bin Ka'b. And the reason why I find her very interesting is because she fought alongside the Prophet ﷺ in many battles, in many wars. And she helped defend the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And again, this was 1400 years ago. And you can only imagine the mindset back then about how people would believe, women aren't strong, women aren't powerful. She put her life in the line to defend Islam and to defend the Prophet. And I feel like she, as a Sahabiya, should be talked about more and more because of, her importance in both protecting our ummah and, serving, the ummah and protect the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And lastly, I want to talk about a woman who wasn't necessarily a Sahabiya. She was during the medieval Islamic times. We hear about the medieval Islamic times a lot because that was what many consider the golden age of Islam, when scientific discoveries and all of that stuff, you guys know about it. I want to talk about this woman named Fatima al-Fihri. Now, what exactly is her significance? Fatima al-Fihri founded a university which still stands today. I believe it's the Al-Azhar University. If I'm wrong, someone would please correct me. But she founded that university, and it still stands today. It's the oldest standing university in the world. Founded, I believe, in either the 8th or 9th century. And it's just such a big deal because a lot of people, typically, in the Western society, there's this stigma that Muslim women aren't allowed to be educated, and it is partly due to the way how a lot of cultures are in Muslim communities, which need to be changed, yes, but the stigma is just flat out false, because, and this historical example is the biggest, rebuttal to this, because she didn't just find a message, she founded the oldest standing university, which has many students today, which has, educated many students, and this was founded by a woman. So I feel like history like this is really important for Muslims to know about, because when people will try to bring down our religion, history like this is important, because Islam has been protecting women's rights and will continue to be protecting women's rights, and women's rights are very, very important, and our religion says so. And we have a lot of, in fact, even today, we have a lot of Muslim, we have a lot of Muslim, female Muslim figures. An example could be in our current, in Congress. We have two female Muslim representatives, Rashida Tlaib, who I've actually didn't meet her. I was in a virtual, it was in a virtual virtual conference with her. It was pretty cool. And Ilhan Omar. And it's just really nice to see how we have not just Muslim but Muslim female representation in our country. It's something that I find really, really cool and interesting. And we have a lot of other Muslim activists and figures, and it's just really important because it shows how our religion is, how our religion does fight for women's rights and fights for women to be treated equally and be respected as such. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله إن الله غفور رحيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So this khutbah was talking about gender rights and gender history within Islam, and I talked about how Islamically women have the same rights as men, and I gave some specific examples such as property as well as political rights, and there's many other rights such as rights when it comes to marriage, among other things, rights when it comes to education, so on and so forth. And I discussed this because in this time, we really, in this time, which is Women's History Month, where we're focusing on women's history, I feel like Islam should not be left out, because our religion has been fighting for women's rights and has been advocating for gender equality for so long. And it's important for us Muslims to learn about it, because there's the stigma created by a lot of people that we don't treat women properly, and that's not true. There's obviously, without a doubt, cultural issues in the way how some men treat women, which is very wrong. Things that we should strive to change together as an ummah. And we should follow Islam. We should follow the Islamic way of how women should be treated. And so I talked about that. I talked about the rights of certain, the rights of women, how they are treated equally to men, and how. And I also talked about certain Muslim, female Muslim figures, as I should say. Some Sahaba such as Aisha radiallahu anha, Khadija radiallahu anha, and Nusayba bint Ka'b radiallahu anha, who all, helped the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and helped the Ummah, they had such a big influence on the Ummah today, as well as some historical figures such as, the first, the oldest standing university, and who was founded by a woman, as well as current Muslim women today who are fighting for our rights in office, or, fighting through activism and whatnot. Very, very important figures, very, very important figures, in our society. And I want to end the khutbah by talking about why I really, really care about this. And I've kind of stated it beforehand, so I'll just reiterate it. The reason why I care so much is because currently it is Women's History Month, and we are talking about women's history, and we're talking about the advancements. And I feel like as a Muslim community, there is we are seen to put women beneath us, treat women as objects and not as people. And it is, while I'm personally against it, and Islam is against it as well, because in Islam we learn about how women have been equal to men for so long, and we could say it as much as we want, but it's important for us to learn about the history, because without the history, we won't really have a way to prove it. And like I said, there's this whole stigma about how Muslims don't treat women equally, and it's unfortunately there is some truth to that stigma because of the way how certain cultures are in Islam. But I feel like as Muslims we should try to end the stigma together by following the way how Islam is supposed to be, by treating women with the respect and the care that we have been instructed to be treated by our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we should also be researching our history, so that when younger Muslim generations come up, younger Muslim women come up, they'll learn about this stuff, and they'll learn about their history. They'll feel proud about being Muslim women, and they won't feel like they've been suppressed. They won't feel like they're being oppressed because their religion and their beliefs gives them power. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive anybody who has committed any wrongdoing. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to anyone who has passed away to grant them into Jannatul Firdaus, to make their trials in their grave easier, and to make them the day of judgment easier. Allah, I ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to help anyone that is going through any sort of hardship right now, whether it be mental, physical, or by their society, any group that's facing oppression. Allah, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help anyone that's the Muslims in the concentration camps in China, to the Rohingyas, to anyone that's facing hardship. Allah, I ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to help the AAPI community right now. They've been going through a very rough time because of this pandemic and the stigmas that have been coming around them, and the hatred. I ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to help any community going through that sort of hardship. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help these vaccines get administered to people quickly, and so that we could restore our normal lives, go back to our masajids, be back with our communities, and live together once again. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وأقم الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح